My family lied about a medical emergency, so I let the judge tell them the truth. So, last winter, I walked into my parents' house thinking we were just going to drop off a casserole, say hi, maybe let my kids see their grandparents for a few minutes. You know, simple, nothing dramatic. But the second I stepped into that dining room, I swear the whole place froze. Except they didn't freeze because they noticed me. They froze because they were too busy laughing, clinking glasses, telling stories I wasn't a part of. I stood there holding a foil-wrapped dish like a delivery girl who accidentally walked into the wrong house. And the wild part? Not a single person turned around. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that the noise, the lights, the smell of roasted turkey had me overwhelmed. But then my dad looked up, finally acknowledging I existed, and said in this half-annoyed, half-bored voice, "Grace, unless you're here to talk business, we're kind of having a family dinner." Business. That's always been the only language they spoke. And here I was, with two kids hiding behind my coat, thinking my own father would at least offer us a seat. So I asked, stupidly hopeful, "Is there a spot for us?" Dad didn't even blink. "Tables are for people who contribute to the family." Just like that. Cold. Surgical. I felt my face heat up in that way where it's not anger yet. It's that sting right before the tears, the kind you swallow because crying in front of them would only make it worse. My daughter squeezed my hand, probably sensing I was trying not to fall apart. And the whole time, my siblings just sat there, some of them looking down at their plates like maybe if they didn't see me, I'd disappear. My mom even lifted her wine glass like this whole thing was an inconvenience she planned to forget the second I left. The Hawthorne family, owners of the biggest woodworking business in town, couldn't spare 3 chairs for their own blood. I told myself not to take it personally. I told myself this wasn't the first time, that maybe I should have known better than to show up unannounced, even though they told me to come by whenever. That's the thing with them. Everything sounds warm until you realize you were never part of the warmth. And the sad truth? I walked in that house really wanting it to be different this time. Wanting my parents to see I was trying. Wanting them to look at my kids with the kind of love I've seen them give to strangers at community events. If disappointment had weight, that room would have buried me. But the part that really stuck with me wasn't the humiliation. It was the way my dad looked at me like I was an intern who missed a deadline. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult me outright. He just dismissed me. Quietly. Efficiently. Like I was something he'd forgotten to throw out. And in that moment, I realized that for years, they'd trained me to believe invisibility was my normal. I guess you don't notice you're starving for affection until someone offers everyone else at the table a feast and hands you an empty plate. I gently set the casserole on the counter and told the kids, "We're heading out, honey." My son asked, "Aren't we staying for dinner?" And I had to bite the inside of my cheek before saying, "Not tonight." My dad didn't say goodbye. My mom didn't look up. My siblings kept eating. The sound of their laughter followed us all the way to the driveway like a reminder that the Hawthorns only made room for the people they approved of, and I wasn't one of them. We ended up at a little diner off County Road 12, the kind with sticky menus and neon lights buzzing like they're exhausted from existing. The waiter brought the kids hot cocoa with extra marshmallows, and they acted like it was the best night of their lives. Watching them swing their legs under the booth while talking about snow angels made my chest ache in a way I can't quite describe. They deserved better than cold shoulders and forced smiles. And the truth? Maybe I did too. Sitting there in that booth, listening to the hum of the heater and the faint sound of a country song playing from the kitchen, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit in years. My family had stopped seeing me as family a long time ago. And here's the kicker. They never told me why. They never sat me down, never explained. They just slowly pushed me toward the margins until I learned to stand outside their circle without asking for a hand. But what they didn't know, what I didn't even realize then, was that the night they shut the door on me was the night the whole story began to shift. Not because I suddenly became stronger or braver or wiser, but because I finally saw the truth for what it was. Sometimes the cruelty that breaks you is the same cruelty that sets you free. I just didn't know yet how far that truth was going to take me, or how loud the hawthorns would scream when I finally stood up for myself. After that night, I told myself I wasn't going to waste another minute waiting for the hawthorns to suddenly grow a conscience. I mean, I'm 32, with 2 kids who think mac and cheese is a personality trait. I don't have time to beg adults to treat me with basic decency, so I buried myself in work. The next morning, I opened the pharmacy at 7 a.m. sharp, still smelling faintly of diner coffee because I barely slept. Customers came in with their usual complaints: aching backs, seasonal allergies, teenagers who won't listen, and I played my usual role, the calm, helpful face that everyone trusts. Funny how strangers get more warmth from me in 2 minutes than my family did in 32 years. Some nights I picked up extra hours doing bookkeeping for a small hardware store near Main Street. Old Mr. Landry, owner of the shop, would leave me a thermos of hot chocolate on the counter with a post-it that said, "Don't work too hard." It's ridiculous how a tiny gesture like that could make my chest tighten. That's when it hit me. Kindness feels different when it's not conditional. When it's not something you have to earn by bending into shapes that don't fit you. It almost made me laugh. My own family couldn't give me 1 inch of that. But an 82-year-old man with a limp thought I deserved a warm drink on a cold night. I kept telling myself I was okay, that I could handle the exhaustion, that raising 2 kids on my own in a town where my family's name still opened doors for everyone but me was just another thing to push through. And honestly, most days I managed. Then came the night the phone rang at 11:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I had just put away a load of laundry and was savoring the rare quiet. When I saw Marla's name, my sister-in-law, I almost let it ring, but something told me to answer. Her voice was a mix of panic and irritation, like I personally caused whatever disaster she was dealing with. She said my brother Ethan had an accident at the family workshop. Something about a machinery malfunction, something about blood loss, something about him being stable, but it's serious. I didn't even have time to react before she dropped the real reason for the call. "We need $5,800 up front. The insurance won't process fast enough. We need it tonight, Grace. You know you're the only one who actually has cash on hand." It was the way she said it, like it wasn't a request. It was an expectation, a duty. As if being the family outcast somehow made me responsible for cleaning up their messes. I asked if everyone else had pitched in. Marla sighed dramatically, saying, "Your parents are busy handling the lawyers, and your sister's still paying off her truck. Can we please not waste time? Ethan could lose function in his hand." And that's the part that got me. Because for all his flaws, Ethan was the one sibling who used to sneak me candy when I was a kid. The one who told me to ignore Dad's harsh words. The one who held my hand when I cried after my first heartbreak. And even though we drifted apart, I couldn't shake the memory of that boy who once defended me. So yeah, I sent half. It wasn't smart, it wasn't financially safe, but I wired $2,900 without hesitating because at the end of the day, I'm still me. Too soft, too hopeful, always stuck between wanting nothing to do with my family and wanting them to be okay. Marla didn't say thank you. She just said, "I'll let them know you helped," like she was writing down my contribution in some invisible ledger. Before she hung up, I thought I heard laughter in the background, loud, carefree, nothing like the life or death situation she painted. Maybe I imagined it. Or maybe my brain was trying to warn me. Either way, I pushed it aside. The next morning at the pharmacy, I was bagging prescriptions when Cole walked in. He's a volunteer firefighter, the kind of guy who smells like wood smoke and laundry detergent, always carrying this calm warmth that makes you forget winter exists. He asked if I was okay because apparently I looked like I got hit by a snowplow. I laughed it off, told him I just didn't sleep well. But Cole has this way of looking at you like he can see more than you're saying. "Whatever you're carrying," he said softly, "you don't have to carry it alone." And let me tell you, those are dangerous words for someone who's spent her whole life pretending nothing hurts. I brushed it off, changed the subject. But the truth? That tiny moment stayed with me. Later that week, I texted Marla to check on Ethan. She didn't reply. I tried again the next day. Nothing. I even called my parents, straight to voicemail. It was weird, but not surprising. Avoidance was practically the family motto. Still, something felt off, like a draft sneaking under a door. My gut kept whispering, something isn't right. And usually, when your gut tells you something in a small Midwest town, you should probably listen. Then one evening, when I was locking up the pharmacy, Evan showed up leaning against his beat-up Chevy. He wasn't smiling, which scared me. Evan always smiles. He scratched the back of his neck and said, "You got a minute?" We sat in his truck, and he kept tapping the steering wheel like he was trying to calm his nerves. Then he finally said, "I think they're lying to you. About Ethan. About the money." My stomach dropped. He showed me a screenshot from Facebook, a picture of Ethan at a bar 3 nights after the accident, beer in hand, fingers perfectly fine, tagged by some guy from high school. The caption? "Good to be out and about after that close call." Close call? My bank account would like a word. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the phone, feeling something inside me go very still. Like a lake right before it freezes. That's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. You get really good at going quiet before you strike. Evan looked at me and said, "I don't know why they did it, Grace, but you deserve to know." And in that moment, I realized something bigger than the lie, bigger than the money, bigger than the humiliation. Someone, at least one person in that damn family, still believed I deserved the truth. But little did I know, that screenshot was just the beginning. The real storm hadn't even hit yet. When Evan showed me that screenshot, something inside me didn't just crack, it shifted. It was like the world tilted an inch to the left, and suddenly I could see everything that had been happening with brutal, ugly clarity. I didn't yell, I didn't even blink. I just felt this cold wave wash over me, the kind that makes you stop breathing for half a second. Evan kept watching me, waiting for me to collapse or throw something. And honestly, maybe that's what I would have done a few years ago. But this time, I just whispered, "Okay." That was all I needed. One tiny piece of truth to shatter the version of reality my family had been feeding me my whole life. The next morning, I walked into the pharmacy like nothing happened. I filled prescriptions. I wished people well. I listened to an old lady complain about the rising price of cat food. I didn't let one drop of anger show because I needed to stay steady, focused, sharp. People underestimate how powerful a quiet woman can be, especially one who's been pushed for too damn long. The calmer I got, the more dangerous the storm brewing inside me felt. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds before answering, because deep down, I knew whatever came next was going to be the match that lit everything on fire. She didn't even say hello, just dove straight in, her voice dripping with that familiar tone, half annoyance, half superiority. "Why didn't you send the rest of the money? Ethan needs it. The hospital is threatening to send the bill to collections. Do you want that on your conscience?" I swear for a second I thought she was joking. I almost laughed. Instead I asked, "How's his hand?" Calm, flat, steady. She hesitated just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. "He's recovering," she said quickly. "Why?" I didn't answer. I just hung up. The truth was already sitting heavy in my chest. They weren't panicked about Ethan. They were panicked about losing control over their favorite target, me. That evening, after I put the kids to bed, I sat on my porch with a cup of lukewarm tea and pulled up every message, every voicemail, every bank transfer I'd sent over the past 2 years. Not just to Ethan. Oh no. To my sister when she needed to fix her car. To my parents when they claimed they were behind on taxes. To Marla when she cried about unexpected medical bills. I added it all up. And when the total hit $11,600, I actually choked. I had been paying for their irresponsibility like I was some sort of family safety net no one asked for, but everyone depended on. The craziest part? I hadn't even noticed. That's how normalized it was. And then came the final straw. The thing that pushed me from quietly furious to, "Oh, now you've really messed up." Around 9:40 p.m., my sister Heather posted on Facebook, a cute little boomerang video from a bowling alley. Everyone was there. My parents, my siblings, their partners, all of them laughing, drinking, celebrating. The caption, "Family night, blessed to have each other." Blessed. Each other. Except I wasn't included. Not in the photo, not in the caption, not in their world, again. My phone buzzed with a message from my mom literally 5 seconds after I saw the post. "We need that money before Friday. Don't make things harder than they need to be." That was the moment something snapped so cleanly inside me that it felt peaceful. Like I'd been underwater for years and finally broke the surface. The next day, during my lunch break, I drove to the small law office in town. The receptionist recognized me, small towns are like that, and offered me coffee. I sat down with a lawyer named Marshall, a guy with sleeve tattoos under his dress shirt and the calmest voice I'd ever heard. I told him everything, every lie, every manipulation, every dollar. He didn't react, he just kept taking notes. When I finally finished, he closed his notebook and said quietly, "Grace, this isn't just emotional manipulation, this is financial coercion, it's serious." Hearing someone else say it out loud, someone objective, someone who didn't know the family dynamics, felt like having oxygen for the first time in years. "We can file a formal demand for repayment," he continued. "If they've been using fabricated medical emergencies, that's even stronger." Fabricated. Hearing that word stung, but it was true. He slid the drafted letter across the desk. It was cold, professional, emotionless. Everything my family wasn't. 14 days to repay the $11,600 or legal action would proceed. I signed it. Walking out of that office, I felt taller, steadier, like I'd grown a spine made of steel overnight. This wasn't revenge. This was reclaiming what they took from me. This was choosing myself for once. 3 days later, the blowback hit. First came Ethan. He showed up at my place unannounced, pounding on my door so hard the porch light rattled. When I opened it, he didn't look injured. He didn't even look ashamed. He looked pissed. "You went to a lawyer?" he barked. "What the hell, Grace? You're seriously doing this to family?" I crossed my arms, keeping my voice even. "You lied to me. All of you lied." He rolled his eyes, actually rolled them, before saying, "It wasn't lying. It was exaggerating. We needed help. And you've always been the one who could handle stuff. Handle stuff. Not afford it. Not wanted to. Just could handle it. Like I was a tool, a resource, a lifeline they were entitled to." "What did you tell them?" he snapped. "Mom's freaking out. Dad says you're being dramatic. Marla's saying you're trying to humiliate us." "Humiliate them?" I almost laughed again. "That letter," I said quietly, "was the kindest version of what I could have done." He froze, and for the first time in years, he didn't have a comeback. But then came the kicker, the moment that sealed everything. As he turned to leave, he muttered under his breath, "You always ruin things. No wonder no one wants you around." I swear the air stopped moving. He didn't look back. He didn't apologize. He just walked off the porch like he hadn't just stabbed me right through the ribs. I shut the door, locked it, leaned against it, and this time I didn't feel heartbreak. I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. Crystal, sharp, unshakable. If they wanted a villain, fine. I could be their villain. Because I finally understood something deep, something painful, something freeing. I wasn't ruining anything. I was ending something that had been broken for a long time. And the storm that was coming? Oh, they had no idea how unprepared they were. The legal notice hit my family like a brick through a stained glass window, loud, messy, and embarrassing in a way they could no longer hide behind whispers. By the end of the first week, I could practically feel the tension radiating across town. Small towns love drama more than church potlucks, and the Hawthorns being sued by their own black sheep daughter? Oh, that was gourmet entertainment. Every time I grabbed groceries or filled someone's prescription, folks gave me that look, the one that says, "Girl, I need the tea." But I just smiled politely, because the truth wasn't anyone's business except mine. Then came the group explosion. It started with a text from my mother that read, no exaggeration, "Your behavior is humiliating. We are your parents. You owe us more respect than this." Respect, a word they loved weaponizing. I didn't respond. 5 minutes later, my sister sent a whole paragraph on how I was ripping the family apart, as if the family wasn't already duct-taped together with denial and arrogance. I didn't respond to her either. Then my father called, And this man, you have to understand, was never one to raise his voice. He didn't need to. His silence always did the job. But now, he was shouting so hard I had to hold the phone away from my ear, accusing me of betrayal, selfishness, cruelty, even questioning my parenting, which was rich coming from someone who hadn't babysat my kids a single day in their lives. He ended the call with, "If you go through with this, don't expect a place in this family ever again." And I said, "You made that decision years ago." Then I hung up calmly, like I had just closed a window on a buzzing fly. But here's the part I didn't expect. The guilt didn't come this time. Not even a flicker of it. Instead, I felt this weird, quiet relief. Like I'd been standing in a house with faulty wiring my whole life, and someone finally flipped the main breaker. The silence that followed should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt clean. A few days later, my sister-in-law Marla appeared at my workplace unannounced, wearing sunglasses big enough to hide her entire personality. She waited outside the pharmacy until my shift ended, leaning against her car like some knockoff TV villain. The moment I stepped out, she started talking, fast, angry, desperate. "Grace, you need to retract the filing. This is ridiculous. You're ruining Ethan's reputation. Do you think anyone's going to hire a contractor who's involved in a legal dispute with his own sister?" I just stared at her, because in that moment something clicked. None of this, literally none of it, had ever been about my well-being. It was about optics. About them looking like the perfect family. About maintaining that shiny, fake image they'd polished for years. I asked her one question. Did Ethan ever plan to pay me back? She didn't answer. She just swallowed hard, her jaw tightening, which was all the answer I needed. When I walked away, she yelled after me, "You're heartless! You don't even care that he could have died!" I didn't turn around, because I wasn't playing their game anymore. And the truth? Hearing her scream those words didn't hurt me. It just showed me how far they were willing to stretch the story to keep themselves clean. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening on the sidelines. The people who weren't related to me were showing up. Like Mr. Landry, the hardware store owner, who left a homemade casserole on my porch with a note that said, "For the nights you're too tired to cook, proud of you." Or my coworker Stephanie, who invited my kids and me to her family's barbecue after hearing bits of what happened, saying, "You deserve a night where no one demands anything from you." Or Cole, sweet, steady Cole, who checked in without prying, leaving a box of cinnamon donuts at my door one morning with a sticky note that said, "Because today looked like a donut day." These weren't grand gestures, but they were genuine, something I wasn't used to. And they started healing parts of me I didn't even know were bruised. The court date arrived quickly. Too quickly. I sat on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, my hands clasped so tight they hurt. The hallway smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner, the same smell from when I finalized my divorce. It triggered memories I didn't want, but sitting there, I realized, I'm not that broken woman anymore. I'm not the girl begging for scraps of affection. I'm not the safety net for people who never cared if I fell. When the bailiff called my name, I stood up straight, breathed, and walked in. My entire family was there. None of them looked at me. Ethan sat with his jaw clenched, leg bouncing nervously. My sister pretended to flip through paperwork, but kept glancing at me like she was trying to read my face. My parents looked stiff, uncomfortable. Two people who had finally lost control of the story. The hearing was short, straightforward. My lawyer laid out the timeline, the transfers, the messages, the fabricated emergencies. My family's attorney kept trying to frame the money as gifts, but nothing about the threats, guilt trips, or manipulative voicemails looked like gifts. When the judge asked if anyone wanted to respond, my father stood up and said, "This is family business. It shouldn't be handled this way." The judge didn't even blink. Family or not, debt is debt. And just like that, she ruled in my favor. Ethan had 30 days to repay the full amount plus court fees. No drama, no shouting, no collapse, just a quiet, clean ending. But the fallout? Oh, the fallout burned. Within hours, my sister blocked me. My mother sent a final text that simply said, "We're done." My father unfollowed me on everything, petty but expected. Ethan sent me a message that read, "Hope the money keeps you warm at night," which honestly made me laugh because for years the only warmth I had came from holding this family together. But the crazy thing? Their absence didn't hurt this time. It felt like someone finally cut off a weight I'd been dragging like a second shadow. In the days that followed, my home felt different. Lighter, safer, quieter in a peaceful way instead of a lonely one. My kids laughed more. Maybe they sensed the shift. I cooked dinner without checking my phone every 10 minutes. I sat on my porch in the evenings without waiting for the next crisis. And one night, Cole joined me. He didn't ask what happened at court. He didn't fish for details. He just sat next to me, handed me a bottle of ginger ale and said, "I'm glad you chose yourself." I didn't cry, but something warm settled in my chest, because choosing myself wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't revenge. It was reclaiming a life I'd been cut out of for years. It was building something new with people who showed up because they wanted to, not because they needed something. And for the first time I realized, family isn't who you're born to. It's who stays when the storm hits. It's funny how quiet life gets once the chaos dies down. For weeks after the court ruling, I kept waiting for some kind of emotional aftershock. Guilt creeping up at midnight, regret sliding in while I was making dinner, that old instinct to second-guess myself. But none of it came. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was soft, almost gentle. Like the world was finally giving me space to breathe in my own skin without asking me to shrink or twist or apologize. One Saturday morning, the kids and I were at the farmer's market, the one near the high school football field. The air smelled like kettle corn and fresh peaches, and a band of teenagers was playing an off-key version of Take It Easy. I was helping my daughter pick out sunflowers when a woman I vaguely recognized from church walked over. For a second, I tensed, ready for gossip or judgment or whatever small-town nonsense people still whispered behind closed doors. Instead, she said quietly, "I heard what happened, and I'm proud of you. It takes guts to break a cycle." Then she squeezed my hand and walked away like she hadn't just handed me one of the most healing moments of my life. Later that day, I sat on the porch while the kids played in the yard. The sky was that golden Midwest color that makes everything look like an old photograph. I pulled out my journal, something I hadn't touched since the divorce, and started writing. Not about my family, not about the money, but about me. About the parts of my life that had been waiting patiently for me to reclaim them. I wrote about who I used to be, the girl who kept her voice small so other people wouldn't feel threatened, the woman who said yes to everything except her own well-being, the mother who tried so hard to protect her kids from pain that she forgot she deserved protection too. And then I wrote about who I was becoming. Someone calmer, someone steadier, someone who still loved deeply, but no longer at her own expense. Choosing myself didn't make me colder. It made me finally capable of warmth that didn't drain me. A few evenings later, Cole and I took the kids to a drive-in movie. Halfway through the film, he leaned over and asked softly, "Do you ever miss them?" And I was surprised by how easy the answer was. "I miss the idea of them," I said, "not the reality." He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. But he didn't push, and that alone meant more than he probably realized. Healing didn't come all at once. Some days, I still caught myself expecting a text from my sister or a phone call from my dad demanding something. Some nights, I wondered if I was being too harsh, or if there was a version of this story where things didn't have to fall apart. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered the look on Ethan's face when he said, "No wonder no one wants you around." And the guilt evaporated. Because that look, that sentence, was the truth behind the truth. The part they couldn't hide anymore. 30 days after the ruling, a cashier's check arrived in my mailbox with no note, no apology, just a cold envelope with my name misspelled. Like even writing it correctly would have required an ounce of humility. I stared at the check for a long moment. Then I laughed. Not a bitter laugh. A real one. The kind I hadn't heard from myself in years. My kids came running out asking what was funny, and I just hugged them, because they didn't need to know the details. They're the reason I fought. They're the reason I won. With part of the money, I finally fixed the leaking roof. With another part, I signed up for a certification program I'd been wanting to take for years, one that might let me open my own wellness clinic someday. Something small, something mine, something built on honesty instead of obligation. A few weeks later, I crossed paths with my mother at the grocery store. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of perfection had finally settled into her shoulders. For a second, I felt that old pang of wanting her approval. Then she walked right past me without saying a word. And you know what? It didn't break me. It didn't even bruise me. It freed me. Because some relationships don't need closure, they need distance. Before leaving, a teenage boy bagging groceries stopped me and said, "Ma'am, my mom said you're really brave." And I swear sometimes healing arrives in the strangest packaging. One crisp October morning, I took the kids on a short road trip. Just a couple of hours, windows down, music too loud, all of us singing horribly off-key. While they ran around a lakeside picnic area, I watched the water ripple under the wind. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Not perfect, not healed beyond recognition, just whole in the way a person can be after choosing herself in a world that taught her not to. I sat there thinking about all the people fighting quiet battles in kitchens and break rooms and cars parked outside someone's house. People who convince themselves they have to stay small to keep the peace. People who confuse loyalty with sacrifice. People who don't realize they're allowed to walk away from what hurts them. If I could tell them anything, it would be this. You can't save people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You can't pour sunlight into places that choose to stay dark. And choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival, it's dignity, it's freedom. The funny thing is, the world didn't fall apart when I stepped out of my family's orbit. It opened up. New friendships, new possibilities, new air to breathe that didn't taste like guilt or shame. And maybe the biggest lesson? Blood makes you related, respect makes you family, and boundaries make you unstoppable. So yeah, if someone ever tells you you're ruining the family by setting boundaries, remember this. A healthy family won't break because you finally learned how to take care of yourself. Only unhealthy ones do. And when you walk away, you'll be amazed at how light you feel. Looking back now, I think the real turning point wasn't the courtroom, the money, or even the moment my family walked away. It was the quiet realization that I'd spent years shrinking myself just to fit into a place that was never meant for me. Sometimes the people we expect to protect us are the very ones who teach us how to doubt our own worth. And sometimes the hardest truth to swallow is that love without respect is just another form of captivity. What I learned is simple, but it took me decades to understand. You're allowed to walk away from what hurts, even if it shares your last name. You're allowed to choose peace over obligation, and you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep anyone else warm. My grandmother used to say, "Real gold doesn't fear the fire." And maybe that's what this season of my life was about. Burning down every lie so I could see my own value clearly for the first time. Choosing myself didn't make me selfish. It made me whole. And the silence that followed wasn't loneliness. It was healing. Funny thing is, they finally apologized weeks later. I forgave them. But this time, on my terms, and with boundaries that don't bend. If this story reminded you of something in your own life, if you've ever carried a weight no one saw or stayed quiet to keep the peace, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experience in the comments, drop a like to support the channel, and consider subscribing for more stories that dig deep into the messy, meaningful parts of being human. Wishing you softness after the storms, clarity after confusion, and a little more peace than you had yesterday. You deserve it.